what is emergency management, especially in the context of a colonized British sort of parliamentary system? So, the first thing I always like to talk to people about is the term emergency management. So, what we have to remember here is management is the key term. That's all it is. Whether it's management of human resources, management of finances, management of a project, management of operations, we are really just focused on managing an organization, a system, a group of people and equipment and money during an emergency. That's all we're doing. So when we think of management, we have to kind of look at it as what is management? Well, it's tools, it's processes, it's communication, it's even systems. So we're just looking at what are the tools, processes, training, systems, knowledge, skills needed to manage the situation when it's in chaos or when everything is totally disrupted. And that's really important because if you can manage a project, if you can manage money, you can manage an emergency. And even if you aren't at a level yet where you feel confident in being able to manage business things or community things or whatever it is, that confidence will come with practice and training and developing the relationships and network needed. So, emergency management in the context of colonization, um, we've got to kind of frame it in how was it invented? Where did emergency management even come from? And I'm going to focus on three areas under the colonial system, under a colonial government system. Not a room here. Government, business, military, and this is under sort of the British um, system that we're currently in. Not only are Indigenous people in this system and colonized and traumatized by it, non-Indigenous people are subject to it as well. And I'll preface all of this by saying that I think before emergency management became something that evolved in military, there were, tribes, uh, villages, small nomadic groups, whether it's, um, indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, Vikings, small villages, agricultural villages, wherever those exist, emergency management was dealt with at a community level. It was individuals being responsible for their community, their commune of things. And whether that was understanding how to properly manage a fire or properly conduct things in the community, everyone took responsibility and learned how to do it safely. And when things did go wrong, um, individuals would step in and help. But that changed. It changed during colonization. It changed under the British parliamentary system. And if we're going to talk about emergency management in common modern day, um, it really kind of started in military aspects. So why was the military used for emergency management? Well, there was good logistical systems involved. There was um, hierarchy. There was resources, lots of people. So the military was quite well situated to help quickly. They could be called upon quickly. They're always training. They had access to government resources. If you look back at military. Even if you go back to the Spartans, even today the Canadian Rangers up in the north. Really, the military was comprised of individuals, farmers. If you go up to the Arctic now, just individuals who work for government or own a small business. They're all outfitted with the things needed to go to war. So Spartans had shields and spears and armors at home, ready to grab and go to war. Canadian Rangers today have skidoos and guns, and they can survive out on the land if needed to. So the military was in a really good position to have people that could respond quickly during a crisis, an invasion, a disruption, whatever it was. And really, the government or the military's focus was to protect sovereignty, protect people, protect land, protect the wealth of the community. As our modern system grew, businesses, well, they needed to protect things as well. They needed to protect their growth, their profits, their assets, assets being even intellectual property, buildings, patents, trademarks, whatever it is. So business, as they grew more larger, corporate, bureaucratic, they really started to look at how the military used tools, processes, systems, training, communication as a way to continue their business operations even during a disruption or crisis. So that's why you'll hear about business continuity, crisis communications, things like that. That all falls in a business aspect because they need to protect their growth, their assets. The business sector, they were always really good at management. So being able to manage during an emergency with the use of military ideas and concepts, it worked really well, and that kind of came out. If we go back to, like, let's look at in Canada specifically, and I'm going to use very recent history because those are the best examples I have. The Halifax um, uh, disaster that happened when I forget the name of the ship, but it was carrying all those munitions and it exploded in the Halifax harbor. That was kind of an eye opener, and you could even go back as far as the Titanic, because the Titanic, when it sank, all Halifax was really the catch-all for that response. So even if you go to Halifax today, there's a Titanic cemetery, and you can go to the morgue where all the bodies were brought from the Titanic into Halifax. So that was really that, with the explosion, really solidified the need for large communities, cities or towns where there was a lot of business, a lot of industry going on, to be better protected and ready. Because with the Halifax explosion, the explosion caused a lot of um, sort of cascading emergencies, such as the power, the force of the explosion knocked over uh, fireplaces in homes, and those started fires. It destroyed buildings. People had no home. Brigades were kind of still not quite ready to respond to that type of thing. So you can look back to the Titanic and the Halifax explosion as good examples as to why did government start to centralize and take more responsibility for emergency management. Yes, the military is connected to government, but it's not necessarily directed by government in all aspects, other than mandate and funding. But government started to look at these events and say, okay, we've got to bring in, just for example, fire department are a good one. Insurance. The central banking system saw a opportunity to bring in insurance, more organized, trained fire departments that were waiting and ready to respond. Government also had an obligation to protect um, people um, sovereignty, the systems, its bureaucracy that it has developed. So you could start to look, especially coming out of World War I, World War II. The military, at least in Canada and all around the world, had gotten really good at managing crisis. After World War II, government really started to pick up in here, and so did business. So coming into the 1970s, we saw massive California wildfires. That's where they did a lot of research and brought out and started the incident command system, which we'll talk about in another video. But that's just an example of where government was stepping in to start to centralize emergency management as a process or as a system, or starting to introduce it in government and cities and towns. So now we've got military, business, government. What what I'm starting to get concerned with government owning emergency management like it does, especially for indigenous communities, is even though the government says it's whole of society, it's um, this idea of what's called a graduated emergency management system. So local, you know, province, territory to federal. So this is where they'll tell you emergency management starts, but where's all the money controlled? Where's all the money for the local capacity? It's it's definitely up here. It gets passed down here, passed down here. Legislation, right, um, is all up here and up here. So even though it's the local responsibility, even though it's the community's responsibility, it's all very centralized. Uh, and that's an aspect of the current colonial system that we all live in and are subject to. I think that, you know, this system has eroded our ability to deal with disruption. And I mean, back at this time, a tribe or a village, a disruption was maybe a fire. Um, Maybe there was invading, other invading groups that would come in, but really it wasn't sort of centered around this idea of like total loss, um, catastrophic. Maybe a whole village would burn down, but at the same time, they're also very resilient and able to rebuild quickly because it was all managed at the local level with local resources, with the systems they had. I worry today as we continue to go through colonization and the parliamentary system, which is historically very centralized. You one example of that is the central banking. Long history for why we have central banking, but really it was just control and power. Emergency management is about control and power. So it's important to understand this concept because looking back at emergency management is going to help us to predict a little bit about how is it going to keep moving forward. And I'm not right or wrong. I don't think in any of this. This is just information that I've learned over my tenure in emergency management. So I'm not trying to say that this is right, it's wrong. It's just the way it is and is unfolded. I think if we keep progressing down this road and government tells us that it's local, but really it's all managed up here, we're going to see this continued centralization of safety. And the reason I kind of predict that is because, you know, we're already talking about a national fire response coordination agency, a group that'll sit at in the hierarchy at the top somewhere and direct resources and coordinate and respond to things. That's a form of centralization. A lot of people are in favor for that. A lot of people are not. Depends where you are in your perspective, in your worldview. But my concern with that is, again, government also is responsible for protecting another thing, the economy. And we already see a this sort of inequity of how emergency management climate change funding is distributed, especially coming out of ministries like Crown Indigenous Relations, where they've got a climate adaptation program. And historically, we've seen the money from that program going to communities that contribute the most to the economy. So if you're living in a northern remote First Nation, very small, not a lot of economic development, even though you're very vulnerable, say from a wildfire side, because you're not contributing to the economy like a city of Brandon or city of Leduc or a community like that, you're not going to be favored in that grant. And we're seeing a disproportionate amount of money going to, and I've been told this by people at CERNAC, and it's in their programs where their climate adaptation funds go to communities that have economic viability. Okay. That's really important to understand because as Canada continues to grow, as the economy continues to grow, as we're threatened by the US and we're threatened by sort of this global disruption around potential for multiple theaters of war to be going on over the next 10 to 20 years, the economy is going to be very critical. And it already is tariffs, right? A form of extortion. So government is going to be really key to this. So the risk here, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but the risk is communities that don't contribute to Canada's economy could see a decline in emergency management support because it's going to go elsewhere. That's just a prediction. So I think it's important to know the history of emergency management, how it was formed, how our current system informs it. We're going to go talk a little bit about incident command system in another video. We're going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of emergency management, but I'll leave it there. And I hope you got something out of this. If you have questions, leave a comment, send an email to support@hazardscape.com. The way we tailor this is it's not super scripted. If if I'm getting questions or we're getting questions about this content, we'll switch it up and introduce new things. So it's always going to be evolving.